Sometimes the richest lessons in life come not from wealth, but from the smallest acts of kindness and the simplest moments of joy. Alexander Grant was the kind of man everyone admired from afar, but feared up close. He had everything: money, power, and respect, but none of it made him happy. His world was full of meetings, luxury cars, and silent halls filled with expensive art. Every morning, he woke up in a mansion so large it felt empty. The only sound that truly meant something to him was the voice of his 6-year-old son, Oliver. Oliver was full of energy, questions, and laughter. He was the opposite of his father, curious and kind. Where Alexander's face was always serious, Oliver's eyes danced with joy. But Alexander rarely had time for his son. His assistant often reminded him of business meetings, calls, and deadlines, leaving Oliver to play alone or with his nanny. One afternoon, Alexander was on his way to a big meeting when his driver's car suddenly broke down on a quiet road. The driver tried to call for help, but the phone signal was weak. There was a small diner nearby, the kind of place Alexander had never stepped into. It was nothing like the high-end restaurants he was used to: no marble floors, no crystal glasses, no expensive perfume in the air. It smelled of fresh coffee, butter, and something warm and comforting. Oliver tugged on his father's sleeve and said, "Dad, can we eat here?" "Please," Alexander sighed. He looked at his watch, then at his son's hopeful face. "Fine," he said softly. They walked into the diner, where a small bell above the door jingled as they entered. Inside, the atmosphere was cozy but humble. Families chatted, old men sipped coffee, and a jukebox quietly played a soft tune. A waitress hurried over with a bright smile. Her name tag read Emily. Her uniform was a little worn and her hair was tied back in a simple ponytail. But there was something about her in easy warmth that made people comfortable. "Welcome, sweetheart," she said to Oliver. Then she looked at Alexander and smiled politely. "Table for two?" "Yes," Alexander said curtly. He wasn't used to being called anything less than Mr. Grant. Emily led them to a booth near the window. Oliver immediately started talking about the menu. "Dad, can I have pancakes? With chocolate chips?" Alexander didn't even look up from his phone. "Whatever you want," he said. Emily noticed her smile fading slightly. She took their order and disappeared behind the counter. While waiting, Oliver kept talking about his toys, school, and how much he wanted a puppy. Alexander nodded occasionally, but his eyes never left his phone. He was checking stock reports, emails, and messages from his assistant. The world inside that little screen seemed more important to him than the real one in front of him. When Emily returned with the food, she placed a plate of golden pancakes in front of Oliver and a cup of black coffee for Alexander. "Here you go, kiddo," she said cheerfully. Oliver grinned. "Thanks, Miss Emily." He picked up his fork and started eating happily. Emily laughed when he got a bit of syrup on his chin and helped him wipe it off with a napkin. Alexander looked up briefly, watching how easily his son connected with her. Oliver talked, and Emily listened as if every word mattered. There was a kind of kindness in her that Alexander couldn't quite understand. Then something unexpected happened. As Oliver reached for his orange juice, his sleeve caught the edge of the glass. It tipped over, spilling juice all over the table and dripping onto the floor. Oliver gasped. "I'm sorry," he said, his eyes wide with panic. Before Alexander could say anything, Emily rushed over. "Hey, it's okay," she said warmly. She grabbed a bunch of napkins and started wiping the mess. But Oliver, wanting to help, slid off his chair and dropped to his knees beside her. "I can help," he said, trying to clean up the puddle. Alexander frowned. "Oliver, get up from the floor," he said sharply. But Emily shook her head gently. "It's fine," she said, still smiling. "He's doing a great job," she laughed as Oliver's small hands tried to chase the rolling napkins that had fallen under the table. Then Oliver crawled under the table to pick them up. And to Alexander's surprise, Emily did the same. She laughed softly, saying, "You're faster than me." Her laughter filled the little diner like sunshine. And Oliver giggled so hard that even a few other customers smiled at the sight. Alexander just sat there watching. His son was on the floor, laughing with a waitress, something that would have embarrassed him any other day. But instead of anger, something strange filled his chest. It was a feeling he hadn't known in years' warmth. For once, Oliver wasn't playing alone. For once, someone was giving his son the kind of attention Alexander never made time for. When Emily and Oliver finally stood up, they both looked a bit messy, but happy. "Mission complete," Emily said, giving Oliver a high five. The little boy beamed. "We did it." Alexander stared at them, speechless. Emily caught his gaze and smiled. "He's a good kid," she said softly. "Curious and kind." "He gets that from his mother," Alexander replied before he could stop himself. His voice was quieter now, almost gentle. Emily just nodded, still smiling. As they finished their meal, Alexander found himself watching Emily more than his phone. She moved quickly, but never rushed. She spoke kindly to everyone: an elderly man, a crying baby, a couple arguing quietly in the corner. Each person got a smile, a few kind words, and a touch of care. Oliver leaned close and whispered, "Dad, she's nice." "Yes," Alexander said, almost to himself. "She is." When it was time to leave, Emily brought the check and thanked them for coming. Oliver waved at her from the door. "Bye, Miss Emily." "I'll come back," she laughed. "I'll hold you to that, little man." Outside, the driver had finally fixed the car. As Alexander opened the door for Oliver, he looked back through the diner window. Emily was wiping down the table where they'd sat, humming softly. Something about the scene so ordinary, so simple, stuck in his mind. All the way home. Oliver talked about Emily. He said she told funny stories and didn't get mad when he made a mess. Alexander listened quietly. Normally, he would have told Oliver to settle down or be quiet. But now, he just let the boy talk. That night, after putting Oliver to bed, Alexander sat in his study, surrounded by expensive things, paintings, rare books, and trophies of success. Yet, for the first time, he felt lonely in the silence. His son had laughed harder in that small diner than he ever had at home. And the woman who served coffee and pancakes seemed to have something that all his wealth couldn't buy: peace. He tried to shake the thought away, but it stayed. The image of Emily and Oliver laughing together on the floor replayed in his mind like a movie scene that wouldn't end. Something had shifted in him that day, though he didn't understand what it was yet. All he knew was that for the first time in a very long time, Alexander Grant, the man who had everything, felt like he was missing something. The next morning, Alexander couldn't stop thinking about that small diner. It was strange for him. His mind was always full of numbers, meetings, and business strategies. But now an image kept coming back, his little boy laughing on the floor beside a smiling waitress. He had never seen Oliver that happy before. There had been no fancy toys or trips, just a broken glass of juice and a woman with a kind heart. Still, Alexander tried to push the thought away. Feelings, he told himself, were distractions. But Oliver wouldn't let him forget. On the way to school, the boy asked, "Dad, can we go back to that diner again?" "I liked Miss Emily." Alexander smiled faintly, but didn't answer. He didn't want to admit that he wanted to go back too. A few days later, Alexander had to travel across town for another business meeting. Coincidentally, the diner was nearby. It was lunchtime, and Oliver was with him. The boy noticed the sign and shouted, "Dad, look, that's Miss Emily's diner." He was so excited that Alexander couldn't say no. He parked the car and agreed to stop for lunch. When they entered, the same bell rang above the door. Emily turned around from behind the counter, and her face lit up. "Hey, my favorite pancake expert," she said cheerfully to Oliver. The boy ran to her, laughing. "You remember me. How could I forget?" she said warmly. "You're the one who helped me clean up my juice flood." Alexander couldn't help but smile. He found a seat while Emily chatted with Oliver like they were old friends. She brought the menus, and Oliver asked, "Can I have pancakes again?" "You sure can," she said, scribbling down his order. Then she looked at Alexander. "And for you, sir?" He hesitated. "Just coffee," he said. "Black again?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "You know, you should try our pie. It's homemade." Alexander blinked, surprised that she remembered his order from days ago. "Maybe next time," he replied. She smiled knowingly. "I'll hold you to that." The diner was busier this time. Families were laughing. The smell of fries filled the air, and a few kids ran between the tables. It was messy, loud, and alive, the complete opposite of Alexander's usual world. He sat back and watched Oliver draw little smiley faces on his napkin while humming along to a song playing softly from the jukebox. When the food came, Emily placed the plates carefully. "There you go, kiddo," she said. "Extra syrup, just like last time." Oliver grinned and started eating right away. Alexander took a sip of his coffee. But before he could say anything, it happened again. Oliver reached for the syrup bottle, and somehow his elbow hit his glass of milk. It tipped over and spilled all over the table. The white liquid ran across the surface, dripping onto the floor. Alexander immediately pulled out a napkin. "Oliver, be careful," he said sharply. His tone made the boy freeze, his eyes wide with guilt. "I'm sorry, Dad," Oliver whispered. Before the tension could grow, Emily appeared beside them like a ray of calm. "It's all right," she said gently, grabbing a towel. "Happens all the time." She crouched down and started wiping the floor. "Don't worry about it." Oliver jumped off his seat again. "I'll help." "Oliver, sit down," Alexander said, his voice firm. But Emily looked up, smiling softly. "It's okay. He's doing great." She handed Oliver a towel, and the boy eagerly knelt beside her. Together they started cleaning, but the milk had spread further than they thought. A few napkins rolled off the table, and one slid under a booth. Oliver giggled and crawled under the table to grab it. Emily laughed too and followed him down, trying to reach the napkin before he did. "You're faster than me again," she joked. People around them started watching. A billionaire's son and a waitress crawling on the floor was not something anyone expected to see. Some people smiled. Others whispered. A few took out their phones, pretending to check messages while secretly taking pictures. Alexander froze in his seat. He could feel everyone's eyes on them. Normally, he would have been furious, his name in the news, his image at risk. But as he watched his son laughing freely under the table, he didn't feel anger. He felt something unfamiliar - peace. For a long moment, Alexander just stared. He saw how gently Emily guided Oliver, how her laughter mixed with his son's giggles, how they didn't care what anyone thought. He realized how rare that kind of joy was. Pure, simple, unfiltered. When Emily and Oliver finally came out from under the table, their hands sticky and faces glowing with laughter, the whole diner clapped playfully. "We did it," Oliver announced proudly, raising his towel like a trophy. Emily stood up, brushing her knees. "You're my best helper," she said, giving Oliver a high five. He smiled from ear to ear. Alexander looked at them, speechless. He wasn't sure what to say. He had spent years buying expensive things for his son, gadgets, clothes, even trips, but he had never seen Oliver this happy. It made him wonder what he'd been doing wrong. As Emily finished cleaning, she turned to Alexander with a calm smile. "No harm done," she said. "He's a good kid. You should be proud." Alexander nodded slowly. "I am," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Thank you for being kind to him." Emily laughed lightly. "Kindness doesn't cost anything, right?" Then she winked at Oliver. "Except maybe a few napkins." The boy giggled again. When they finished eating, Emily brought the bill. But Alexander noticed his coffee was missing from it. "You forgot to charge me for this?" he said. She shrugged. "On the house. Consider it a thank you for your little helper." Alexander wanted to insist on paying, but the warmth in her tone stopped him. "All right," he said quietly. "Thank you." As they stood to leave, Oliver gave Emily a quick hug. "You're my favorite waitress," he said happily. Emily's eyes softened. "You're my favorite customer," she replied. On the way out, Alexander glanced around. The people who had been watching earlier were back to their meals. But one woman near the window gave him a small smile and said, "You have a wonderful son." He smiled back. "I know," he said simply. Outside, Oliver was still buzzing with excitement. "Dad, did you see me help?" Miss Emily said, I'm her helper now." "I saw," Alexander said, opening the car door. "You were amazing." As they drove away, Oliver kept talking about Emily, how she laughed, how she didn't get mad when things spilled, and how she said kindness doesn't cost anything. Alexander listened quietly, a small smile tugging at his lips. He thought about what she said, how kindness costs nothing. For someone like him, who had built his life around deals and profits, it was a strange idea. But maybe she was right. Maybe not everything had to be bought. That night, as he watched Oliver sleep, Alexander felt something inside him change. He realized that what happened in that diner wasn't just a small accident, it was a lesson. His son had found joy in something as simple as cleaning up a spill. Emily had treated that moment not as a mistake, but as an opportunity for laughter. For the first time in years, Alexander began to see the beauty in small things. The sound of Oliver's laughter, the warmth in Emily's voice, the messy, imperfect, real side of life that he had ignored for so long, and though he didn't know it yet. That afternoon would be the start of something much bigger, something that would soon change his world completely. A few days passed, but Alexander couldn't get Emily out of his mind. He told himself it was silly. She was just a waitress from a small diner. But something about her stayed with him, like a quiet song he couldn't stop hearing. Every time he looked at his son, he remembered that laughter under the table, those smiles, that warmth that had filled the air. It had been so simple that it made everything else in his life feel dull and cold. Alexander had built his world on rules and control. Every decision he made had to be perfect. He wasn't used to surprises or mistakes. But Emily had handled a mess with laughter, not anger. He couldn't understand how someone who seemed to have so little could be so full of life. One morning, he asked his driver to take him to that same diner again. Oliver was at school, and Alexander told himself it was just for a cup of coffee. But deep down, he knew it wasn't only that. When he walked in, Emily was behind the counter, laughing with a group of regular customers. Her laugh was bright and real. She turned when she heard the bell ring and smiled. "Back again, Mr. Coffee and Pancakes?" Alexander smiled awkwardly. "I suppose I am." She nodded toward the same booth as last time. "Your favorite seat's open." He sat down, and she brought him coffee without even asking. "Black. No sugar," she said, setting it down. "You look like you've had a long day." He gave a small laugh. "It's only 10 in the morning. That's plenty of time for life to wear you out," she said playfully, then walked away to serve another table. Alexander watched her move around the diner. She greeted every customer with warmth, refilled coffees before people even asked, and remembered everyone's names. He noticed her shoes. They were old, with tiny cracks near the edges, but she didn't seem to care. She smiled as if the world hadn't touched her with any sadness. When she returned to his table, she asked, "So, how's your little helper doing?" "Oliver's fine," Alexander said, smiling at the thought. "He keeps talking about you." Emily laughed. "He's a sweet kid. Smart, too. He told me he wants to be a pilot someday." Alexander nodded. "He changes his mind every week." "That's the best part of being a kid," Emily said softly. "You still believe you can be anything." Her words lingered in Alexander's mind. He looked at her closely for the first time. She had tired eyes, but there was kindness in them, something he rarely saw in his business world, where everyone smiled for a reason. He wanted to know more about her. After a moment of silence, he asked, "You've been working here long?" 3 years, she said, taking a sip of water. "It's not easy, but it pays the bills. I've got a daughter, so I do what I can." "You have a daughter?" Alexander asked, surprised. "Yeah, her name's Lily. She's 8, Emily said proudly. "She loves drawing and always covers my fridge with her artwork." He smiled. "Sounds like a creative kid." "She is," Emily said, her eyes softening. "She gets that from her dad. He was a carpenter. Could build anything out of wood. He made our dining table, our shelves, pretty much everything in the house." Her voice trailed off for a second, and then she added quietly, "He passed away 2 years ago. Car accident." Alexander looked down at his coffee, unsure what to say. "I'm sorry," he said finally. Emily shrugged lightly. "It's okay. Life goes on. Lily keeps me going. In this place, well, it's not fancy, but it's honest work. I'm grateful for that. He studied her face again. There was no bitterness there, no sign of complaint, just quiet strength. For a woman who had lost so much, she still smiled like she had everything. It puzzled him. "You ever think of doing something else?" he asked. Her eyes brightened. "Actually, yeah. I've always dreamed of opening a bakery. I love baking. Cakes, pies, bread, you name it. But dreams cost money, and I can't afford to risk what little I have. So for now, I just bake for Lily's school events."
Alexander felt something stir inside him.
"If you ever needed help financially, could Emily shook her head before he could finish. "That's kind of you, but no. I don't like taking help I haven't earned. When I open that bakery, I want to know it's because I worked for it." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He wasn't used to hearing people refuse money, especially his money. Most people tried to please him or impress him. Emily didn't care who he was. She was content with her simple world, and that made her stronger than anyone he knew. Their conversation was interrupted when another customer called for her. She excused herself with a smile, leaving Alexander deep in thought. He stayed longer than he planned, just watching life unfold around him. There was laughter, small talk, and the sound of plates clinking. No one was rushing, no one pretending. It was a world he didn't belong to, but suddenly wished he did. When he finally got up to leave, Emily said, "Tell Oliver I said hi, and remind him no spilling juice next time." He chuckled. "I'll try." As he stepped outside, the cool breeze hit his face. He paused, looking back through the window. Emily was serving another table, her smile never fading. Driving home, Alexander thought about his life. He had everything: a mansion, cars, power, but it all felt empty compared to that little diner. The people there were not rich, yet they seemed content. And Emily Shea was living proof that you didn't need money to have peace. That night, he sat in his study again, staring at the city lights through the large glass window. The world below looked like tiny stars, each one representing someone's dream. He thought of Emily's words. "When I open that bakery, I want to know it's because I worked for it." He admired that kind of determination. He remembered his own journey, years ago when he had nothing. Back then, he'd been hungry to prove himself. But somewhere along the way, he had lost that hunger. Success had made him cold, careful, and disconnected from real life. Later, he went to Oliver's room. His son was asleep, hugging his toy plane. Alexander brushed the boy's hair gently and smiled. He wanted his son to grow up with kindness, not just ambition. He wanted him to know that money wasn't everything. For the first time, Alexander realized how much he had missed. He had been living like a machine, chasing numbers while ignoring the things that truly mattered: love, simple, happiness. That night, as he lay in bed, he made a quiet promise to himself. He would bring Oliver to the diner again, not because of the food, because of the feeling it gave them both, a warmth he hadn't known for years. He didn't understand it yet. But Emily had awakened something inside him. Part of his heart he thought was gone forever. And slowly, without even trying, she was teaching him that real wealth wasn't measured in money, but in moments that made life feel alive. A few weeks later, Alexander found himself thinking about Emily more often than he cared to admit. Every time he looked at Oliver, he remembered how alive his son had been in that little diner, laughing and crawling on the floor with her. It was a memory that stayed with him, warming a part of his heart he didn't even know was cold. He had been so focused on wealth and power for years that he had forgotten what joy felt like. But now, that joy seemed possible again, and he wanted to see it not just in his son, but in the world around him. One Saturday, Alexander decided to take Oliver to the diner again. This time, he arrived alone at first. He wanted to see Emily, to learn more about the woman who had unknowingly shaken his world. When he entered, she was rearranging plates behind the counter, humming softly. The diner was busier than before. With families and friends enjoying lunch together, Emily looked up as the bell jingled and smiled. "Back again, Mr. Coffee?" she said warmly. Yes, Alexander replied. I wanted to talk to you about something. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Oh, what is it? He hesitated for a moment, feeling the unfamiliar sensation of nervousness. Normally, he gave orders and people obeyed without question. But Emily wasn't like anyone he had ever met. She treated him like any other person. That made him uncomfortable, but also intrigued. I heard you've always wanted to open a bakery, he began, and I want to help. I can invest in it, fund it fully if you want. Emily paused, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked at him carefully, then shook her head gently. I appreciate the offer, really. But no, I need to do this on my own. If I open a bakery, I want it to be mine, because I worked for it, not because someone bought it for me. Alexander was taken aback. He wasn't used to people refusing his help, especially when it came with no strings attached. Most people eagerly accepted, grateful for the opportunity. But Emily's refusal was different. She had pride, determination, and independence. And for the first time, Alexander felt a deep respect for someone who didn't need him. All right, he said quietly, a small smile forming. I can respect that. Emily smiled back. Thank you. That means a lot. Just then, Oliver ran into the diner, full of excitement as usual. Dad, Miss Emily, look what I drew. He held up a colorful drawing of a cupcake with big, happy eyes. Emily knelt down and took the drawing. Wow, this is amazing, Oliver. You're an artist already. Alexander watched them together. He realized that Emily wasn't just kind or strong. She had a way of making people feel seen and valued. Oliver felt important, and so did Alexander, though he hadn't realized it yet. They spent the afternoon talking, laughing, and sharing stories. Emily told Alexander about her childhood, how her father had taught her to bake, and how she had dreamed of opening a bakery since she was a little girl. She also shared small, personal struggles, being a single mother, managing bills, and balancing work with raising Lily. Alexander listened quietly. Absorbing every word, he noticed how she never complained, how she never blamed anyone for her hardships. She simply lived, worked hard, and found joy in little things. It was a stark contrast to his own life, where everything had to be perfect and every moment had a purpose tied to profit or success. By the time the afternoon ended, Xander felt something inside him shifting. He had come thinking he could help her, maybe even impress her with his wealth. But Emily had already taught him a lesson without realizing it. True strength, true success, didn't come from money. It came from perseverance, kindness, and the courage to follow one's dreams. Over the next few weeks, Alexander began bringing Oliver back to the diner regularly. The three of them developed an easy rhythm together. Oliver would run to Emily as soon as they walked in, excited to show her drawings, tell her about school, or share stories from his week. Alexander, who was usually serious and reserved, found himself relaxing, laughing more freely, and enjoying the simplicity of the moment each visit reminded Alexander of what life could be like outside of his mansion and office. Emily treated everyone equally, whether they were a child, a regular customer, or a stranger. She worked hard, laughed freely, and found joy in ordinary moments. Watching her interact with the world made him reflect on his own life, how lonely, controlled, and empty it had become despite all his riches. One evening, as they were leaving the diner, Emily handed Oliver a small cookie. For being such a wonderful helper today, she said. Oliver hugged her tightly. Thank you, Miss Emily. Alexander watched them together and felt a warmth he hadn't felt in years. He realized that happiness wasn't something you could buy or achieve through power. It was found in moments of connection, kindness, and in laughter. Emily had shown him that without even trying. That night, Alexander returned to his mansion, but the quiet felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with thoughts of Emily, Oliver, and the little diner. He thought about how small gestures, like letting a child help clean up a spill, or refusing help to preserve dignity, could carry more meaning than any business deal he had ever made. He went to Oliver's room to check on his son. Oliver was asleep, clutching a small stuffed animal. Alexander sat quietly, watching him breathe, and realized he wanted his son to grow up valuing kindness, independence, and joy as much as he valued success. He wanted Oliver to see that life was about more than wealth. In the days that followed, Alexander continued to visit the diner, sometimes alone, sometimes with Oliver. Each visit brought new conversations, new lessons, and new laughter. Emily shared stories about her life, her dreams, and her daughter. She never treated Alexander as a rich man who could solve her problems. She treated him as a person. And that made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: respect, admiration, and even a little humility. He began to notice small details about her: how her hands worked quickly and carefully, how her voice carried warmth even when she was tired, how her eyes sparkled when she spoke about baking. These were qualities no money could buy, and they fascinated him. One afternoon, as he sat drinking coffee, Alexander realized he was thinking not about his next business move or investment, but about Emily and her dream of a bakery. He wanted to see her succeed, not because he could fund it, but because she deserved it. And somehow, he wanted to be a part of that world event, if only as a quiet supporter in the background. For the first time, Alexander understood that life wasn't about owning the best things or controlling every outcome. Life was about moments, relationships, and the quiet strength of people who faced hardships with courage and a smile. Emily was one of those people, and watching her had awakened something in him that he hadn't felt in years: hope. As he drove home that evening, Alexander felt lighter than he had in a long time. He looked at Oliver in the back seat, chattering happily about school, thought about how lucky his son was to have experiences like this. And he thought about Emily, her courage, her kindness, her dreams. Alexander didn't yet realize how much his life would change because of her. But he knew one thing for certain: the woman in that small diner had already begun to teach him what truly mattered, and he was ready to listen. From that day on, the diner became more than a place to eat. It became a place of lessons, laughter, and reflection. It reminded Alexander of the life he wanted, not just for himself, but for his son. And though Emily didn't know it, she was slowly guiding him toward a world where love, kindness, and dreams mattered more than wealth or power ever could. Months passed, and Alexander's life began to feel different. His trips to the diner became regular, sometimes with Oliver and sometimes alone. Each visit reminded him of the lessons he had learned from Emily, the value of kindness, humility, and simple joys. Alexander noticed changes in himself too. He laughed more, listened more, and cared less about perfection or appearances. He started paying attention to moments instead of numbers, to people instead of profits. Emily had no idea how much impact she had on him. To her, Alexander was just a polite man who visited the diner now and then, always with Oliver in tow. But to Alexander, she had become a teacher, showing him that real wealth came from the heart. She had also taught him patience and the importance of allowing someone to achieve their dreams on their own terms. One day, as Alexander walked into the diner with Oliver, he noticed a small envelope slipped under the door. He picked it up and saw Emily's handwriting. Inside was a simple note: "Thank you for always bringing Oliver. He brightens my day, and I hope mine brightens his. Emily." Alexander smiled. Her words were modest, but they carried meaning deeper than anything money could buy at that moment. Alexander realized he wanted to help her achieve her dream, not as a gift, not as a show of wealth, but quietly, so that when she opened her bakery, it would truly be her own success. He began making arrangements behind the scenes, contacting suppliers, arranging logistics, and smoothing out obstacles, all anonymously. Emily would never know that a billionaire was helping her. She would only see that hard work and perseverance had brought her dream to life. Weeks later, the tree opened its doors. The smell of fresh bread and warm pastries filled the air. The sign above the door was simple, elegant, and entirely hers. A small crowd had gathered, excited for the grand opening. Inside, she arranged the counters, checking every detail herself. Her hands moved confidently, guided by years of skill and determination. Oliver ran ahead, holding Alexander's hand tightly. "Look, Dad. She did it," he said, eyes wide with excitement. Emily looked up and waved at them. "You made it." "Thank you for coming." Alexander smiled quietly. He didn't need her to know that he had helped behind the scenes. That wasn't the point. He wanted her success to be hers, earned through her effort and heart. He watched as Emily greeted every customer with the same warmth and energy she always had. Her joy was contagious. People smiled, laughed, and lingered, enjoying her baked goods and the welcoming atmosphere. As they explored the bakery, Oliver tugged at Alexander's hand. "Dad, can I help Miss Emily?" he asked eagerly. Emily knelt down to greet him. "Of course, but only if you promise to wash your hands first." Oliver ran to the sink, laughing, and Alexander followed him quietly. Feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years, watching Oliver interact with Emily, Alexander realized that his son had grown too. The boy had learned lessons about kindness, hard work, and joy. He had learned that success wasn't just about getting what you wanted, but about helping others and being part of a community. Alexander thought about his own life. For so long, he had measured success in numbers, deals, and appearances. He had built an empire, but it had left him lonely, distant, and disconnected from the simple joys of living. Now, standing in that bakery, watching Emily and Oliver together, he understood something he hadn't before. Happiness wasn't in what you owned, but in the moments you created, the lives you touched, and the love you shared. Emily's eyes met his briefly, and she smiled. There was no recognition of his role in her success, and that was fine. Alexander realized that true fulfillment didn't need acknowledgement. He didn't need thanks. Seeing her happy, seeing her dream realized, was enough. Throughout the day, Alexander noticed small details about the bakery, the way the sunlight hit the counters, the scent of fresh pastries, the laughter of children enjoying cookies. He realized that life could be rich in ways no money could buy. He thought about his mansion, his cars, his office filled with awards and trophies. None of it could compare to this feeling of genuine joy and accomplishment. Oliver, meanwhile, was having the time of his life. He helped Emily place small trays of cookies on the counter, showing a surprising level of care and attention. He laughed freely, told jokes, and even offered polite greetings to customers, as if he understood the importance of kindness and hospitality. Alexander watched, amazed at how much his son had grown, not just in age but in heart. By evening, the bakery had quieted down. Emily wiped down counters, smiling at the last few customers leaving. Alexander approached her with Oliver by his side. "You did it," he said simply. Emily looked at him, puzzled. "I know," she said. "It was a lot of work, but worth it." Alexander nodded. He didn't explain anything further. There was no need. The achievement was hers, fully earned, and that was how it should be. He felt a deep satisfaction that he had never experienced in his life of wealth. As they walked outside, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the bakery. Alexander took a deep breath. He felt lighter, freer, happier. For the first time, he understood that life was not about controlling everything, buying everything, or always being the strongest. Life was about moments, love, laughter, and helping others reach their dreams while learning from their strength. He looked at Oliver, who held Emily's hand and waved at her from the doorway. Alexander realized that his son had been teaching him lessons all along, lessons about joy, kindness, and living fully. And Emily had been the guide, showing him that true wealth was measured in smiles, laughter, and the hearts touched along the way. That night, driving home, Alexander felt a change he couldn't ignore. He wasn't the same man who had walked into that diner months ago. His world of power and money still existed, but it no longer defined him. His priorities had shifted. He wanted a life full of real moments, shared joy, and meaningful connections. Oliver fell asleep in the back seat, clutching a small cupcake from Emily's bakery. Alexander glanced at him and smiled. He understood now that happiness was a choice, and it could be found in the simplest of moments, like a boy crawling on the floor with a kind waitress, laughing freely and creating memories that last a lifetime. When they reached home, Alexander watched Oliver sleep peacefully, the cupcake forgotten but his happiness evident. He reflected on how Emily's courage, kindness, and independence had changed his life. She hadn't only opened a bakery. She had opened a door in his heart that had long been closed. Alexander knew one thing for certain. He would never forget the lessons he had learned. Wealth could buy many things, but it could not buy joy, humility, or genuine love. Those came from the heart, from courage, and from simple acts of kindness. Emily had shown him all of that without ever intending to, as he sat quietly in his study. He realized that his world once defined by money and control had transformed into a world ruled by love, laughter, and meaningful connections. Emily and Oliver had brought him back to life in a way no business deal, no mansion, no luxury could, and from that day forward, Alexander made a choice. He would live differently. He would treasure moments, nurture love, and celebrate the simple joys of life. He would support dreams quietly and without expectation. Just as he had supported Emily's, the diner, the bakery, and the laughter they shared had changed him completely. Alexander knew that he had found something far more valuable than wealth. He had found the heart of life itself, and he would never let it go.